Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Little White Lie. The Ur-Nammu Code is a code or a group of Sumerian laws that were drafted sometime between 2100 and 2050 BC. This is so long ago, of course things were really different, but there are some laws and rules from that time that really make you go, what? One of these is the bizarre one that pertains to kidnapping. Of course, kidnapping is never good, and they knew that back then, but they were a little more liberal or forgiving when it came to certain scenarios. So basically, according to these rules, kidnapping was punishable by but only if both the kidnapper and the kidnappee were free men. If the person who was kidnapped was a slave, the sentence was just a monetary fine. Okay, that's pretty messed up, but it's not necessarily all of that bizarre to hear about the mistreatment of slaves in history. I mean, I said slaves. It was bad from the get-go, and this rule was certainly no exception. But it gets even more bizarre from here. If the person who was taken was a woman, well, I mean, a little white lie and you're good to go. By this I mean, should the kidnapper just claim that the woman had been found in the street alone without a companion, this was enough to get off scot-free because, I mean, how could he possibly know whether or not she belonged to anyone? Yeah, that really was the thought process back then. You see what I mean when I say it's just a law that makes absolutely no sense? Kidnapping is bad. It's so bad we'll put you to death, but like, it's only kinda bad when it's like this. Just kidnap the right way and we'll have no issues. In our number 9 spot today, we have royal fish. This is one law that came into existence because someone was feeling a little greedy. Since 1324, it has been decreed that all beached whales in the UK belong to the king or queen, and we can all thank Edward II for this weird one. In 1324, he passed a law defining whales, sturgeons, dolphins, and porpoises caught within 5 kilometers of the shore as, quote, royal fish. These fish collected a lot of money in medieval markets, and those who were wealthy wanted these fish for their special feasts and banquets. Of course, instead of purchasing them with your riches, what do? Well, you just make up an insane law so that you can steal them, of course. What's even crazier is that this law actually hasn't been repealed, and in 2004 there was a fisherman who caught a 10-foot sturgeon near Wales, and he actually had to ask Queen Elizabeth's permission to sell it. Apparently she told him that he could use the catch as he saw fit. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Flamen Dialis. In ancient Roman religion, the Flamen Dialis was the high priest of Jupiter. There are other forms of Flamen or high priests, and many of them had bizarre rules surrounding them that they had to follow, but these are some of the strangest. Among the rules set out for the high priest of Jupiter, there were rules that forbade them to touch iron or flour. They were not allowed to ride a horse. Okay, this is weird so far, but not like too bad, right? Well, they also had this rule where if a prisoner enters their home, they must be released. Then their chains must be taken through the hole in the roof and then from the roof dropped into the street. That sounds both weird, oddly specific, and like a lot of work for no reason. The rules don't end there though. The Flamen Dialis also was not to touch or name a female goat. No flame could be carried out of their house unless it was for sacred purpose, and there must be a box of sacrificial cakes at the foot of his bed. This is actually just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the rules these people had to live by. Many of the rest really are just as curious and bizarre. I'll say this, the life of a Flamen Dialis certainly must have been anything but boring. In our number 7 spot today, we have Draco's rules. Draco of Thessaly has often been considered the author of the very first laws of Athens, which came around 621 BC, and some of the very first draconian codes were very simple. The jury is out on whether or not they were effective, but it was definitely clear. It goes basically as follows. Did you kill someone? Penalty. Did you steal someone else's goat or whatever animals they had in ancient Athens? Penalty. Did you accidentally forget to pay your taxes? Penalty. You get the idea. You commit a crime? Well, that's it. No second chances on this guy's watch. That's literally it. You're done. Sorry, you should have thought of that before you committed a crime. Also, there's some crazy things that were considered crimes back then, so I can't imagine. Anyway, thankfully his successor wasn't quite so harsh and changed basically all of that, except for the whole death penalty for killing someone thing, which like, fair. At the very least, it's quite a bit more reasonable. In our number 6 spot today, we have marital infidelity in Mesopotamia. Hammurabi was an ancient Babylonian king, and he ruled Mesopotamia from 1792 until 1750 BC, and during his reign he produced some of the earliest legal codes in history. He created what became known as the Code of Hammurabi, which consisted of 282 laws, which were listed in a sort of if-then kind of format. Each law was distinct to a social class, and the punishments were specific to the type of infraction. There were many bizarre rules here, but one of the strangest parts were the different punishments for men and women, specifically in regard to marital infidelity. So basically, men were allowed to have extramarital affairs with maids, servants, slaves, you know, of course. Women, however, what are you, crazy? Any woman found philandering and their secret lovers were punished by being bound and tossed into the Euphrates. I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Call me crazy, it's just a little bit of a double standard. I don't know, maybe I'm just too futuristic for Mesopotamia. In our number 5 spot today, we have a punishment worse than This is more so a punishment for breaking the law rather than the actual law itself, but it's something that I didn't know previously and I found exceptionally interesting. This comes from the Qin dynasty and it involves something worse than the death penalty. You might be wondering how something could be worse than the death penalty, and to that I say, great question, here's how. The penalty could be intensified based on the method that was selected for it. Like sometimes the person who had committed the crime would end up having their entire family executed. That's probably the worst thing I can imagine. Sometimes the criminal, if sentenced to death, would then have their body exposed in the marketplace or their head mounted on a pike, which was meant to disgrace their death. Not only these after humiliations, but sometimes pre-death torment also occurred. So yeah, surprisingly, the penalty can actually get worse. In our number 4 spot today, we have nope. Okay. This is a disgusting one. I'm sorry we're talking about it, but it's what the video calls for. This law comes from the ancient Anatolian people who formed an empire between 1600 and 1180 BC. This law is about what happens when a person does something to an animal. I don't want to say it, so we're probably thinking the same thing. It's messed up, you get me. So this law explains that the punishment for this crime depends on what animal it was with. A dog or a pig? No way, buddy. Not on our ancient watch. That's punishable by a horse or a mule? You're a messed up dude, and for that, you never get to appear before the king again. He can't even look at you. A cow? Well, here's the thing. The king is going to decide what happens because this one needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. See what I mean by this law that makes no sense? I'm glad that they were at least punishing people for this back then. I think we can all agree that that's the right thing to do, but it's just very strange that it differed depending on the animal. You know? In our number 3 spot today, we have who's to blame. Okay, we've been having a silly fun time for most of this list, despite the various bizarre laws that have existed, but this one is definitely a little more serious, and it's one that, especially as a woman, is definitely a touch infuriating. This law comes from Nessalem, another one of the laws by the ancient Anatolian peoples. So basically this law starts off a little better than it ends. It has to do with when someone harms a woman. Normally, under this law, this would be punishable by This is where the law goes a bit awry, however. That is the case only when the crime is committed abroad. At home, however, oh, total free-for-all. If this crime happened at home, of course, the woman was actually guilty. Not only that, but she would then be condemned to death instead of the person who did that to her. I actually couldn't believe it when I read it. Things simply were just different back then, and I truly feel grateful that this isn't a law that has stuck around. It does make me feel exceptionally bad for the women who found themselves victim to this insane rule, however. In our number 2 spot today, we have the roast battle. This is perhaps one of my favorite laws, and it's one I think we should bring back. This is officially my petition. This law is hilarious with just a little less harsh of a sentence. You'll see what I mean. This law comes from ancient Rome and the law of the 12 tables, and basically it condemned anyone who sang a joking or mocking song about someone else to but the sentence only came if what the person sang was untrue. If you just roasted the hell out of someone and everyone turned around and said, well, where's the lie? Then there's no problem. Carry on, you little musical genius, you. I mean, at least they were taking a stand against bullying all the way back then. I just think it's insane that the law is so extreme. Like a little silly ditty that's just part of a rumor mill is an absolute no-go. Don't tell the ancient Romans about magazines and tabloids or diss tracks. They'll be so mad. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Innocence Test. Another one of the rules that comes from the Code of Hammurabi is one that forces accusers to prove their accusations indisputably. Okay, they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. We still go by that, so that's not really that weird. What is weird, however, or maybe dramatic is a better way to put it, is that if they failed to do this, they would then be condemned to biggest Uno reverse card in history. Like, even knowingly false accusations probably shouldn't be punished with the sentence, but imagine just not having enough evidence to convince everyone and then you have to die because of it? Like, it's not like DNA testing or photos or videos existed, so how do you prove these things in a way everyone will believe you? It seems way too risky to even try. Also, one of the methods used to try and test someone's innocence is to throw the accused into the river. If they drowned, it was because the gods knew that they were guilty, but if they managed to get out alive, they were considered innocent, and then their accuser was executed for falsehood. Like, I'm not taking the chance on whether or not this guy can tread water. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have a suit of armor. Okay, so imagine this. You're on your trip to London. You're ready to visit Parliament. It's the moment you've waited for your whole life, and of course you brought your very best suit of armor. You're dressed to the nines. You're fully protected. You're ready. Well, have I got bad news for you? No armor allowed. Yeah, this is a law that made a lot more sense at the time it was created, and the weird part is that it still exists and has never been repealed. By 1313, Edward II had upset so many nobles that he became worried about the prospect of an armed rebellion and wasn't feeling safe enough in Parliament. This led to a statute that claimed that every man shall come to Parliament without all force and armor, and those who didn't abide by this rule would be punished. Since then, no one has thought to change it, and I guess while no weapons still makes a lot of sense, the whole armor thing is simply just because it isn't as popular now as it was then. Who would have thought? In our number 9 spot today, we have magic crops. Many ancient laws are extremely specific, and so much so that they come with a specific punishment to fit the crime. I mean, we have some guidelines around sentencing and stuff, so it's not that weird, right? Well, I mean, it really comes down to what the law is asking, you know? Like, for example, this ancient law comes from the Law of 12 Tables, and it has to do with crops. Basically, the law states that the crime of using magic on crops was punishable by death, this time in the form of crucifixion. Like, please, no one tell the ancient Romans about Monsanto. They'll be so angry. I so badly wish I could know what, at the time, was looked on as magic on crops. Some guy with a green thumb is getting accused of witchcraft. Also, how serious of a punishment? Imagine just making more corn for everyone and suddenly you have to be put to death in one of the worst ways? I don't know. This one seems a little extreme, but almost everything was in ancient times, I'm beginning to think. In our number 8 spot today, we have butt naked. This is a law that was first enacted in 1463 and was repealed in 1604, and it has to do with some middle-aged fashion. Basically, from 1337 onwards, laws began to be passed that were meant to preserve decency, as well as sort of govern people from dressing above their rank. I mean, God forbid someone wear one too many frills. At this time, however, men's fashion was getting a little out of hand, and people were worried about the immoral way it was going. In 1463, a statute was passed that claimed that, quote, no person under the rank of lord was to wear any gown, jacket, or coat which does not cover the genitals and buttocks. Listen, this is a law that absolutely makes sense. It's just absolutely hilarious. I mean, the part that doesn't make sense is that lords or anyone above were just free to roam around with all of their bits and pieces hanging out no problem. It's truly so funny. I wish I could pay money to sit in on the announcement of this law though. Just some sad guy walking home to go put pants on. It's like, but my little butt. In our number 7 spot today, we have the right to citizenship. This is a law that was seen in a lot of different societies throughout the ages in some ways or others, and in fact was even seen in our own modern society until about a century ago. Basically, this began in ancient Greece, and it has to do with women not being allowed to be citizens. Athenian democracy was only available to adult males, and women were left out of it all. Women were referred to as an aste, which meant a woman belonging to the city. In fact, there was a time where, since there was no registration of women, that witnesses would have to testify in court cases to prove that women were the wives of Athenian men. Women had to work at home and were considered second-rate humans, subservient to her male guardian, whether that be her father or husband. This was all justified by the men at the time because it was actually believed that women weren't as intellectually capable as men, and because it was believed that women had a higher sex drive, and consequently, if given free range to engage in society, would be more promiscuous. Basically, they were just insecure and felt that if women had free range, then they would go out and cheat on them, so instead they just really didn't let them participate in society. Of course, it wasn't just a century ago when women got the right to be citizens, but it was just over a century ago that in our modern society, we got the right to vote. It's crazy to see how much things have changed and how some other things took quite some time. In our number 6 spot today, we have dinner time. This is a law that was first enacted in 1336. It's definitely not the oldest law on this list, but it is one that really shows what things were like at the time. So many of us have heard and learned about the over-the-top extravagance and indulgence that happened at medieval feasts, and this led to, in 1309, a proclamation by Edward II where he began criticizing the outrageous and excessive multitude of meats and other dishes that the nobles were eating. Later, in 1336, there was a statute by Edward III where he too described his unhappiness with the quote, many mischiefs caused by the quote, many sorts of costly meats which people of this realm have used. This statute, however, set out to do something about this overindulgence, and they tackled that by ruling that no man, of whatever rank he be, shall be served a meal with more than 2 courses, except for at certain festivals, such as Christmas, on which 3 courses were allowed. So basically they made a law that banned having more than 2 courses for dinner unless it was a special occasion. I can't imagine the government policing my food consumption. What makes it even funnier is that while these laws are believed to have perhaps influenced behavior, there is no evidence of it actually ever being enforced. So they made the rule to make them feel better basically, and it lasted for quite a while until 1865 when it was repealed. In our number 5 spot today, we have family crimes. This is a law that is truthfully kind of similar to one that we talked about in part 1, but this one comes from ancient Egyptian law. It seems as though much of Egyptian law was based on a common sense of right and wrong, following the codes based on the concept of Ma'at. Ma'at represented justice, truth, order, and balance, and basically this concept meant that everyone, with the exception of slaves, should be treated as equals under law, regardless of wealth or social position. If we removed slaves from the equation, this is of course not too far off from our current ideals and the current concept we strive to have within our legal system. The huge difference, however, is that when time for punishment came, it wasn't done to just the person who committed the crime. The consequences were for them and their entire family. If a person was exiled, their entire family would be along with them. If a relative faulted on some kind of labor demand or other service, the entire family might be imprisoned. I'm just saying, Uncle Gary and Aunt Lisa really could have messed things up for you big time. Like, I would not trust my extended family with my legal fate. Not a chance. In our number 4 spot today, we have fancy footwear. This is another one of those middle-aged laws that has to do with men's fashion, and this time, everyone's butts are away. This one has to do with men's footwear. Shoes with long, pointy ends called krakows or pikes were all the rage back then in the 15th century. Like, I'm talking so much so that the points were getting so long and so out of hand that they were having to be tied around the wearer's ankles or the backs of their knees. It was truly and utterly ridiculous. That same 1463 statute that dealt with everyone's butts, yeah, it also had a part to deal with the shoes, because if everyone is tying up their long shoes behind their knees, how are we supposed to know who the fancy ones are? This law stated that, quote, no knight under the rank of a lord, esquire, or gentleman, nor any other person shall wear any shoes or boots having spikes or points which exceed the length of 2 inches. Punishments for not following this one was a fine of 3 shillings and 4 pence, which is just over £100 by today's standards. I think this law makes no sense because no one should be allowed to have shoes that long, lord or not. In our number 3 spot today, we have revenge. The times of Vikings was certainly an interesting and exciting one, and while many see movies that portray the time and think that Vikings lived in a lawless, almost cavemen-like society, that actually couldn't be further from the truth. While we may not want to take up some of the laws that they lived by, they did have their own codes and laws, and we'll talk about a couple of the weirder ones today. Like this one. Vikings were expected to take revenge as described by the Glotting Code. This was written in the 1000s and is actually the oldest known body of laws in the Nordic countries. So basically, if someone did you some sort of injustice, whether it was violence or insults, you could request financial compensation. I would have been bleeding my childhood bullies dry. However, if you didn't defend yourself, there was a limit to what you could request. You were fully expected to take matters into your own hands if someone wronged you, and if you didn't, this meant that you might be giving up your right to financial compensation. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Barber. Okay, so this is a law that has to do with slaves. It's an unfortunate part of history, and it's also important to remember that it still does exist in some places. This law, in terms of a society that has slaves, I suppose makes sense. It is just bizarre, however, because the punishment for this is unbelievably extreme. This law is one that comes from the Code of Hammurabi, and during this time, many of the slaves were actually former prisoners of war and their families who were then forcefully inducted into this new Babylonian society. This law basically states that if a barber, without the knowledge of his master, cut the sign of a slave on a slave not to be sold, the hands of the barber will be cut off. How extreme is that? The punishment is so severe, it makes you think that they almost cared about the slaves, but sadly, of course, that wasn't true at all. It was more so looked at as a very serious and important business venture. So serious that they would chop your hands off. In our number 1 spot today, we have Facing the Truth. This is a Viking law that has to do with taking someone else's life, so it's a serious one. Well, I mean, it was kind of serious back then. Basically, you could get away with killing someone, but only if you were honest about it. Like today we have different charges for different circumstances. More serious and less serious charges, there's like a ranking, but Vikings of course didn't have these exact same distinctions, and instead it was a matter of honesty and being straightforward. For example, something like arson or taking someone's life at night was actually looked down upon because you surprised them. No one else was around, and you didn't give them a chance to defend themselves. I'm like, okay, I see the point they're making, carry on. This is where things go a little awry by today's standards though. You could kill someone in public without serious consequences because you were doing it publicly, and both the person as well as those around them had a chance to react to it. The only other stipulation is that you took responsibility for it and that you didn't flee. Even if a fight broke out and someone ended up passing away but it was unintentional, as long as you were open and honest, it wasn't considered a serious offense. I guess they were just very forgiving in Viking times. Perhaps in the wrong ways, but who am I to say?
Kicking off the list at number 10, Pedestrian Crossing. Okay, I see this far too often in the city. People just walking across the street whenever they want. They do a little wave, a little smile, and then they just jaywalk right in the middle of like a highway. Everybody's slamming the brakes, and old Peggy Sue is just crossing wherever is most convenient for her. It's not fair. Well, Article 40 of Beijing's traffic laws stipulates that drivers in motor vehicles can't just suddenly stop, even if it's at a crosswalk. Yeah, so if somebody's about to walk at a crosswalk, they have to wait until drivers go by. It's forbidden to stop at these crossings, and if you do so, you're risking a fine. Hopefully, just a warning. Just a warning not to stop at crosswalks. It's kind of weird. That's an odd slap on the wrist. Hey, I noticed you stopped. Don't. See ya. Number 9, never nude. Okay, how do I word this one here? We've all heard about it in some way, I'm sure. You know those websites that we visit after the sun goes down? Maybe you're scrolling through Reddit even, some random threads pop up, you're like, okay, sure, that's not what I clicked. It happens. I used to download music from the internet. The things I've seen in pop-ups alone, horrifying. I have to wash my eyes. Well, in China, the government monitors the internet, so none of the adult content really makes its way to your eyes ever, even if you wanted it to. You get what I mean? Anything scandalous is censored. Objectionable material as well, just in general, won't make it to the screen or even the book. Yeah, you can't even write about being nude because they'll toss literature right out. Only think dirty thoughts, don't say them. Number 8, born this place. The hukou system is an interesting one. When you're raised in a small town, you can't wait to grow up and move. Maybe it's the city life for you that you yearn for. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're sick of hearing trains go by every morning and you want to head to the country and hear some crickets. Having the choice to visit and move back and forth, rent out these places, that's a privilege. Depending on where you were born in China, you may be limited to the areas that you can and can't move to. You might literally be stuck living in the country. The government monitors every single citizen, so if you spend more than 3 days away from your residence, You have to register for a temporary residential permit. They have the system in place so that residents can't just all migrate at the same time to cities and then cause a food shortage. Number 7, family time. Chinese culture centers heavily around respecting your elders. That's a huge element. And really, we need to enforce that everywhere, if I'm being honest. That's a great law. Yeah, I said law. Back in 2013, China introduced an elderly rights law, meaning they're not being neglected anymore. You don't visit Gam Gam, well, you're going to the slammer. Loneliness among the elderly is a major issue, so companies will even allow time off to visit your parents. My heart feels warm knowing this, honestly. My first job was at a retirement home and I used to love it. I used to keep my headphones out, I used to talk to all the old ladies, all the old dudes. I was like 16 years old, I was a garbage guy. I would do recycling. It was the best. I love talking to them. They're lonely. Talk to them. Adults are legally required to also stay in the loop, not just visit, shake a hand or two, and then leave. No, you have to spiritually connect with your elders in China. You can't just phone it in, literally. If you feel bad now, hit that thumbs up and go call your grandma. Number 6, unauthorized reincarnations. Yeah, this one's fun. China's authorities created a law so Buddhist monks can't be reincarnated there without legal permission, of course. Always gotta get legal permission, even to reincarnate. The State Administration for Religious Affairs believes that this was an important step that they had to take. This was put in place to limit the power of the Dalai Lama. So 2 separate Dalai Lamas might be chosen in the future. Yeah, like Captain America, different timelines. This is insane, hear me out. Beijing's view of the current Dalai Lama, the 14th, he's now 86 years old, and he said that when he was 90, he would make the choice whether or not he would be reincarnated, which could end a role that's been in Tibet Buddhism for over 600 years. So yeah, like I said, it's a big deal. That's where laws come in play and make this whole process tricky. The government, they're trying to limit the power of the Dalai Lama since he's been living in exile in India since the late 50s. So we could have Beijing's approved Dalai Lama that was, reincarnated, and the one identified by Buddhist monks. 2 different ones. So if you're planning a reincarnation anytime soon, well, you better get approval from China first. The people of Tibet are very unlikely to accept a Chinese Communist Party appointed Dalai Lama. Number 5, work friends. This next one's a little lighter, and honestly, if this rule was in place over here right now, well, a lot of my friends wouldn't have jobs. You can't date coworkers in China. Yeah, and what's even better than that is that if you date somebody, sometimes your work will assess who you're dating, like outside of the field, and then they have to approve of them. That's amazing. This internet company in China, their dating rule in the workplace got leaked. And let me read some of these rules out, and then let's see if we agree here. Rule 42, males who have been employed for less than a year and females who have been employed for less than 3 months are prohibited from finding a boyfriend or girlfriend in the company. Okay, you gotta bust some tables first. Rule 43, female employees who have found a boyfriend outside the company and have decided to have relations with him must take the initiative to tell their superior. Only if the relationship is fitting for the company can she then continue to be employed, and those who fail to report are directly expelled. So if you worked for Pepsi, Carol from Coca-Cola's accounting would be a no-go. Get what I'm saying? Rule 44, male employees under 25 are restricted from finding a girlfriend in the company. Hashtag grow up. Rule 46, frequently changing boyfriends and girlfriends within the company is prohibited. Those who have changed more than 3 times will be permanently expelled. So choose wisely. Number 4, one-child policy. Immediately darker. This one was phased out recently, but I have to bring it up. Introduced in 1979, the Chinese government made this rule where a majority of couples could only have 1 child. This was done to control population growth, but of course, from a human rights point of view, things got a little dicey. See, come 2015, things didn't magically change, it just switched to a 2-child limit. And then finally, come 2021, it's completely phased out. The government saw this plan as a way to keep things running smooth, but in doing so, they reduced the fertility rate. And there ended up being a labor shortage because seniors needed those kids, as in the only one of those kids, to take care of them. No one was left to work, see what I mean? As per point number 7. Number 3, tickets please. Medical systems are different everywhere, and in China, having that many people, things have to run smoothly. It's a must. There's more often than not a wait line for most commodities. They have something called healthcare tickets over there. Honestly, I kind of agree with this. I'm pretty on board. If you're looking to see a doctor, you gotta buy a ticket first. Like a movie, a really slow, boring, coughing a lot movie. You can buy these tickets like you would movie theaters, through an app or through a website, whatever works best. Because if you don't have a ticket, it would be an extremely long wait time just to see a doctor and talk and then plan something. After they bought a ticket, patients can register it to a specific doctor that fits their needs, rather than wait in a room full of sick people all going to the same person, that slow process that I'm used to over here in Canada. This way, patients in China can just go specifically to the doctor that they need, rather than get referred over and over and over again and wait in these long lines. Do you agree with this fast pass system? Sound off below. Number 2, busking. Here in Toronto, we have Busker Fest. It's amazing. My friends perform in it. It's loud, it's full of energy. It's an outdoor variety show. If you've been to any major city, at one point you've seen a kid butchering an Ed Sheeran song. That's busking. Buskers are common, and in Hong Kong, they're really not. You're not allowed to whip out a banjo, throw down a hat on the sidewalk, and start improvising with locals. It's an offense to play any musical instrument in the streets. So keep that tromboning to yourself. And finally, number 1, banned. To cap this list off on laws you didn't know about, I figured I'd just rapid fire a few things that are banned in China. All your favorite things. Most of them are websites. Google is a no-go, YouTube as well, so you won't find my face over there. And speaking of face, Facebook too is banned, which honestly isn't really a total loss. Reddit is not allowed, so say goodbye to your late night scrolling. Netflix too is blocked, so no more binging and Netflix and chilling. Wikipedia, blocked. Zoom was blocked for a hot minute. Messenger, of course, being part of Facebook, or I mean Meta, is blocked. So if you wanted to block somebody, you couldn't because Messenger was blocked. I'm saying block a lot. We're all blocked. No more local rappers as well spitting bars on your newsfeed either, because SoundCloud has been blocked for 8 years. I'm on board with this one. This one's fine. Until podcasts came out, we're like, okay, drop those. When we're done with scripts here, we toss them in Dropbox. I'll never take Dropbox for granted again because over there it's blocked. Imgur has been blocked for a couple years now too, so no more GIFs. GIFs? GIFs. GIFs. Definitely GIFs.